to talk to you about reed cages. More specifically, a reed cage for the Air Conception Tornado 280. And this does apply for the 200 as well, the Nitro 200 and the Revo 200 also. And it probably will work for the Revo 280, but I haven't confirmed that. Just as a disclaimer out there to everyone, I'm not a content creator. I'm not much of a video editor, and I apologize if the shots aren't looking that great or if the sound quality isn't that great. I don't know. I'm learning. It's not a thing that I'm used to. Feels very awkward, but no, sorry. I really just want the information to be there and so that it helps others. I hope it get better at it, and yeah, apologize in advance. Yeah, I want to talk to you a little bit about swapping these over. I won't say it's a direct fit, although it's very, very close. There is a little bit of a clearancing with the V-Force reed cage and the engine block intake. So some of you may have experienced having weird idle, hard starts, poor tuning, irregular throttle consistency, poor throttle response, all of that. Like all of it is encompassing, right? In my particular experience, what I had happen was, one, the intake plate was bowed. So over time you torque these bolts down from the intake plate to the engine, and then there's a bit of a curvature that ends up happening over time. I don't know if you can see it. You can kind of see it. And then as well with the carb mount, there's two brass inserts and you can only torque these so tight, and eventually what happens is that bows as well if you over torque that, and it causes air leaks that happen over time. Heat cycling these parts, because they're a phenolic material, cause it to warp over a period of time. To combat that, I actually ended up designing and making 6061 T6 aluminum intake plate to prevent any of that warpage from happening. Also, due to the warpage, the original reed valve ends up warping as well. The cage warps. Like, I don't know if you can see it. You might be able to see it. Right about there. What happened was the tips of the reeds bow as well and lets air leak past the reed. They don't seat correctly. They don't sit flush with the reed cage. You can see light through the reeds and the reed cage itself. That is loss of combustion pressure. If these reeds don't seat and they don't create enough combustion pressure, then you blow it out through the top, through the carb itself, and then you get poor characteristics for a good running engine. So I opted to buy what would be a V-Force reed cage, although this one here, I decided I was going to cheap out and get a Chinese-made V-Force reed cage because I thought, why not? Same, right? Well, no, unfortunately, it wasn't, at least not for me, because I could still see light through it, which means even the aftermarket Chinese knockoff reed cage had air pockets where the reeds were not sealing, and that's a problem. I have here are the V-Force reeds, and when I got them, look, you can see, though not nearly as bad, you could still see some pedals that have light in them, and that's also not good. So I bit the bullet and decided to buy the actual V-Force reed cage, and you can see there's an actual difference. Like, you can see a little bit differences in like the reeds, the reed body. Yeah, I mean, it's night and day. Holding it hand in hand, I probably can't see it on camera, but essentially no light, at least not to the same caliber of the original one or the knockoff V-Force either. That matters. Combustion pressure matters. So, switching to an actual V-Force reed cage, Moto Tisanari is a great company. This isn't a plug for them. I just was researching and trying to find a replacement because the reed cage is quite expensive, and I don't feel like they're built well enough to hold up over a long period of time. I just don't have any trust in spending that much money on a reed cage when, you know, if this happens again, and what? This happened to me originally in about 50 hours, 60 hours, this failure. as well as like noticing the warpage on the intake plate. And you know, I thought it was a carb. I had rebuilt the carb, retuned the carb over and over and over and over, and finally I had realized one day as I was tuning and I got it running that I was spitting out fuel mixture through the intake out of the filter because I had the filter off. All in short is I ended up getting a V-force reed cage to replace the original air conception cage, and then made through Fusion 360 the design of an intake plate that closely matches. I ended up rapid prototyping this piece a few times until I got the dimensions right so that it would match correctly. And then once I had everything dimensioned correctly, I sent the file out to get remade in 6061 aircraft grade aluminum, and I've had zero problems since then, and it's been great. I put a new carb on there. I didn't even have to adjust it. I just ran it to base settings for what Air Conception recommends through their manual, just as a baseline. And yeah, I mean, it ran, it idled. I still had to do some tweaking and adjusting, but it wasn't much. It's been a great solution for what I believe a lot of people have either experienced or might experience. I'm not saying everybody's going to go through this, but I'm not the only one. I've offered my solution to a couple of other pilots that have had or experienced the same problem, and it's worked out well in their favor. So you do have to clearance it just a slight bit, and I'm not talking a lot. I'm talking like 1 millimeter, maybe, right? 10,000ths of an inch, for those to fit down inside the intake. And ta-da, you'll have a great solution. Honestly, you take like 600 grit sandpaper, polish the sides. There's an embossment with the V-Force name on the side. A lot of times you just smooth that off just to give yourself enough clearance to fit down inside the intake plate, and it'll fit just fine. If you look closely here, you may or may not be able to tell, but that intake does not typically want to fit in there because of that tolerance right there. It's usually too tight. Now, like I said, I've taken roughly 10,000ths of an inch off, and it just barely fits in there nice. The other note is that it won't go all the way down, and a lot of times you have to push down on it, and what happens is this contours inward and it hits these pedals. These are reed stops to protect the reeds from over flex. What'll happen is when you push this in here, it'll float out like roughly about like that, and what you'll have to do is push that in and push it down in order to get it to stay. And then when you mount your carb on top and put your bolts in, it'll obviously keep it in place. Just an important note so that you don't think it's not fitting correctly. It's because these are bowed out and hitting the side of the engine block. Push that in, put the bolts in, boom, everything's been done. At least it did for me. Bust off like a charm. On a side note, as far as how it runs, it brings back your healthy idle. Like, you can hear it in the tone how healthy the engine sounds, how strong it sounds through the idle, and it idles very well. A side byproduct of having the V-Force reed on the cruise RPM, typically on, I don't know about Viderazzi and all the other engines out there, where your phase is within your main jet and your idle jet, but at least for me on Air Conception, it's right in that 5,000, 5,200 RPM range. And coincidentally, switching to the V-Force reed has lowered my phase range for my idle jet to my main jet to 4,800, which is phenomenal, because a lot of times if you're just trying to add a little bit of power or come off power just a hair, right, on and off throttle just a little bit, just to adjust altitude for finer, minute adjustments for whether you're proximity flying or matching or whatever, maybe you want to climb just a hair or, descend just a hair. That matters when your idle jet and main jet phase is right in the same RPM range as where you cruise throttle, and it can be cumbersome because then all of a sudden you add a little bit of power and you get this jump in power, and it's sometimes hard to control. Lowering the phase range from the idle jet to the main jet allows you to have more minute controllability of your throttle range through the cruise RPM, 5,200 RPM, and you can fluctuate that all the way down to about 4,800 before you really start to see the main jet shut off. And that allows you to very accurately and fine-tune your flying style with very minute throttle inputs and changes to that. So essentially adding more torque to the engine in a lower RPM range so that you make more power sooner. So that's a pleasantly happy side effect of running the V-Force Reed. Yeah, we'll get into a little bit about some of the differences, some of the dimensions, some of the hardware is different. It's not much, longer bolts, which is not a huge difference. Actually, I've got two here. You have to get longer intake bolts because the intakes are actually longer or taller. If you look at the differences between the V-Force Reeds and the original air conception Reeds, it is a taller intake plate, so you need taller bolts to compensate for that. And you can get them at, Ace Hardware, Lowe's. I think I got mine at Ace. A couple of bucks, not a big deal. 4mm Allen. And yeah, I've only made a small batch of these, and ironically I've already sold them all, but if there's interest out there, I can figure out what it would cost to bulk buy these and sell them if people are interested in them. Figuring out how to make my engine more reliable, because it is power to weight the best motor that I have flown yet. I do have the Tornado 280 and I do have this Moster 185 on a ProPulse Titan. It is also lightweight, but again, not to say Viderazzi is a bad engine. I think it's a very reliable engine. It just doesn't put out the same amount of power, and I'm a power flyer. I don't know what to tell you. I know there's a lot of people out there that believe one way or the other. I like power. It's just my thing. If you want to be finesse and fly with less power, hey, cool, more power to you. But I get better economy with more power, and that's what I choose. So, for anyone asking about what Moto Tesonari V-Force Reed I used, it's the V4144. It does come with hardware, but they are the wrong size and the wrong thread pitch, so whatever you do, do not use them. For the intake plate, again, it's 6061 T6 aircraft grade aluminum that I had machined. I created the file in Fusion 360. For the intake plate, I used the OEM one as a reference point, then used rapid prototyping to create one out of a 3D print. And then once I had the file finalized, sent the file out to get made, and that's what we ended up with. I also opted to go for an original Walbro carb instead of the air conception carb. I'm not sure if it's Walbro or not. There's no markings on it, so I can't say otherwise, although it looks identical. Well guys, that about wraps things up for this video. I hope this video ends up being informative to somebody, and I hope it's helpful to anybody out there that's flying techno-fly engines, air conception engines. I just want less problems. I want more reliability, and I'm hoping that this is a step towards that. It certainly has been for me, and I hope it does for others. If you have any questions, feel free to put it in the comments or reach out to me. I'll help in any way that I can. Thanks for coming by. See you later.